All right, joined now by Esfandiar Baraheni of SDPN Sports, covering the Toronto Raptors for us here at the Alley Oop. Let's talk about the Raptors, 12-18, coming off of a great win here. It might be over the Washington Wizards, and now they do have the tax for playing the Washington Wizards, so the 43 assists that they put up, we'll drop that down to 35, but it's still a great win. Tell us about that game.
Funny you say the 43 assist thing because they actually set their franchise record against the Pistons last month with 44, and they've had 3 40-plus assist games this season, which is it's sort of a testament to the style the Raptors want to play this season under head coach Darko Rajakovic. He is pretty much every post game he is out there talking about assists, whether they win or lose. He's like, well, we only assisted 28 times versus we're trying to get above 30. So that's clearly an emphasis for this team. And yes, it is against the Wizards. It definitely is against the Wizards, and you got to take all that with a grain of salt. But the Raptors did also change something in this game, and I think that's interesting to sort of look forward for the next 6 weeks, which is an all-important I'm sure we'll talk about it, but it's an all-important 6 weeks for the Raptors. They switched out Dennis Schroder, put him on the bench, and started Gary Trent Jr. instead. Their starting lineup was the second most frequent used starting group in the league this season, only behind the Houston Rockets with the Fred VanVleet group, and they were the only negative starting lineup that has played more than 300 minutes together this year. So they were bad. That their starters were just not good enough. And they were sliding down the standings in December, and so they decided to make a change, and tonight we saw that.
Yeah, it's always been interesting. We've talked about the Scottie Barnes at point guard lineup as a possibility, which is really what this is kind of doing, where you've got Gary Trent Jr. is kind of your off-ball guy, and Scottie Barnes is handling, but Pascal Siakam was another guy who was handling. I saw you put up 11 assists. That is a great number, obviously. And when you're playing a team like Washington, obviously you get a little bit of free reign to do some different things, but this is, I think, a really nice step in the right direction for them, perhaps transitioning into what the future might look like for this group.
Yeah, no doubt. Scottie had the ball more tonight. Even Pascal Siakam had the ball more tonight. I thought OG Anunoby, even in bench lineups, had the ball more tonight. And when you look at like Schroder, right, his career, he has been a really, really good backup point guard for 10 plus years. He has made an entire career off of being a backup point guard. So he was probably punching above his weight a little bit as their starting guard. I thought tonight he just slotted in so well as this, creator off of the bench. He was getting the bench guys involved, playing alongside guys like Otto Porter Jr. and even Chris Boucher, and just guys who are able to kind of slot into their spots offensively. Dennis is allowed to cook a little bit more in the backcourt. And the byproduct of that is the starting lineup with Scottie and with Pascal. Those guys are now being the main ball handlers. They are being tasked with the playmaking stuff on all fronts when it comes to the starting lineup. And you mentioned that, Pascal had 11 assists tonight. I think Scottie ended up with 10 himself. And you see the impacts of that. And ultimately, I just think they are able to create advantages a lot more when it's those guys that have the ball. And I think there's more balance to that starting group now that you have Schroder being the guy off of the bench doing that.
There's a lot more flexibility that you get with where you can have Dennis Schroder kind of deployed off the bench in advantageous situations, things that are going to be more impactful for him specifically, and kind of seeing him as that change of pace guy that can play 24 to 30 minutes off the bench. That should be the role, I think, where that's the idealized version of him. The problem they run into in Toronto specifically, just from my perspective, sitting on the couch over here, is that there's just not enough guard talent right now or in the backcourt for Toronto. And even if Schroeder is idealized in that position, like you said, he's overtaxed. He's put into a position where it's really tough. But I can see the vision with it. It may not happen this year, but it looks like there is a plan, and I like where it is going, despite the fact that, hey, 23rd in net rating this year, 23rd in offense, 18th in defense. Yeah. This year might not be it, but there are reasons to be happy about where it can go.
By the way, I agree with you. I completely agree with the sentiment that this is sort of an idea for the future and not for now. Even if, the byproduct is beating the Wizards by 30, you still got to see how this starting lineup looks moving forward, and how Scottie looks as your lead ball handler moving forward. But ultimately, a lot of what you just mentioned actually goes back to how good Scottie has looked so far this season.
Right.
Looking like an all-star level player in the Eastern Conference. Tonight, I believe it was 20 points, 8 assists, and 12 rebounds, 3 steals, 2 blocks, right? His
fantastic.
Everything you'd want out of a forward type player, right? The defensive side of the ball is an area where he's taken a massive leap. Just his attentiveness on the help side, the weak side rim protection, just using his length in advantageous ways on defense. And then on offense, I think 3-point shooting is the massive thing. He hit 4 threes tonight, 4 threes against the Jazz a couple of nights ago. He's been knocking down 39% of his threes all season, which is just it doesn't even make sense type of leap.
Right.
And ultimately, I don't know if that'll stick. Who knows if that will stick around? But regardless, he's found other ways to score. He's being asked to be the lead ball handler now moving forward. I assume his usage will go up because of it. And his defense has improved more, at a massive rate too. So ultimately, it looks like he's an all-star type of player now. And, despite the poor record, I think they're 12-18 now. Despite the fact that, like you mentioned, their net rating, their offensive rating, defensive rating isn't that great this season. The one silver lining with this team is Scottie Barnes looking like an all-star. You feel more reassured, like you said, in the long-term vision of things with this team.
I can see a path forward. And the path that I'm looking at right now, I don't know whether Scottie's going to be the best player on the team. I don't know whether, if the championship version of this group. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether he's going to be a 1A, a 1B, a 2, whatever it's going to look like. But I know that he's up there. And so much of building a team and so much of understanding where a team kind of has to go is about having at least that benchmark of, hey, we can trust this guy. We know that this guy is going to be in the hunt for winning a playoff series, winning 2 playoff series, doing all the things that we ask him to do. And he's still so young, and you're allowed to be so patient in a situation like this that it's understandable why a guy like Masai Ujiri has taken the long view with something of this nature. I also, sort of just looking at the roster, I can see the Scottie, OG, Jakob Poeltl trio being the front court of the future next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, I didn't include Pascal Siakam.
Oh, the other side of that equation. Yes, I understand.
Yeah. seems a little detail of the guy that was the one tie to the previous regime and the previous championship team, which it's kind of difficult to see. So as covering the Nuggets, I was able to watch the Nuggets Raptors game very closely. Pascal Siakam looked very checked out of that game. He looked very out of it when it comes to doing the detail work that the Raptors were asking him to do in that particular matchup. That is one game, one microcosm of a long season, but I can sort of see where things might diverge with this particular tandem, this particular trio, with the OG Pascal Scottie trio, which has been so central to what the Raptors have done for the last 2 years. What's up with Pascal? Had a great game tonight. Where do you kind of see this going?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. I think there are moments where a lot of these guys feel checked out, and it's not just Pascal. There are moments where OG feels checked out. I think some of his defense has slid this season, and maybe that's because of the contract stuff or whatnot. There's moments where Gary Trent Jr. has looked checked out, also dealing with contract stuff this season. So sure. I do think there is a level of maybe they don't believe in the team as much as the front office is doubling down on this team. Have you ever been in a run, like playing basketball, and you're with a group and you're like, yeah, man, this group is not looking good.
It ain't happening.
It's not happening. And then you get on a different team and you're like, okay, all right, this team can do let's do some damage. You can't help but feel sort of checked out in those type of moments. And as far as the trade stuff goes, I think the contract stuff plays a big part in this. Pascal Siakam is currently extension eligible. They can extend him tomorrow if they'd like to, yet they haven't. And I think the writing is on the wall there in the sense that they obviously haven't offered him a contract extension, which implies that they are eventually going to be moving him at some point. That's why these next 6 weeks is really important, because look, they're 12-18 right now. They are near the bottom of the Eastern Conference standings and sliding. They have a really, really tough schedule. I mentioned it on Twitter last night, but 15 of their next 22 games are on the road. They are 4-9 on the road this season. So, and that includes 2 massive West Coast road trips, 11-day West Coast road trips, 2 of them in the next 22 games. They are set up to lose a bunch of games in the next coming weeks towards the trade deadline. And to your point, I do wonder if that means they're going to shake things up in a major way. On top of the, kind of questions that go along with, how does the fit work? How does the contractual stuff work? Are you going to double down and pay the luxury tax? Because that's what it would require to sign both Pascal and OG and go over the cap for them. So that's why it's probably going to be one or the other. And to your point, most likely going to be Pascal.
Yeah, I like the OG fit. I think that there's a reason to believe in a Scottie, OG, Jakob Poeltl front court. Like, Poeltl's not going to be he's not going to be your do-all-everything kind of guy, but he is somebody that you need to soak up minutes with, and he's a guy that you pay a 4-year, what was it, $80 million contract extension? Like, that's a lot of money, and that is a big thing that you got to do. So
at the very least, Jakob is a stopgap option. For when you're transitioning from when Scottie and OG are kind of figuring things out together to the point where they're competing together, and then maybe you can find a new center at that point. But overall, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, but it's going to be a center is probably the big thing. It's kind of going away from the 6'9" club, which is I don't know if that was the actual moniker that was given to that group, but
Vision 6'9", Vision 6'9".
Yes, exactly. There you go. But it does feel like this is kind of the turning point, and where, hey, it might be a tough schedule, but if they do rattle off some wins here and they decide, hey, this is something that we want to continue going with, and we like the vision of this, then maybe they're buyers still. Maybe because that was kind of the turnaround that they had at the deadline last year that I know a lot of people were a little bit unhappy with.
I would refute that. I think that would be a mistake. I mean, I understand last year they were 25-30, and even then I was like, they should not be buyers. They just weren't in a position, especially given the fact that it was the Wemby draft and all that stuff. Like, they shouldn't have been buyers. And yes, they got Jakob Poeltl, but they also limited their pick flexibility for 3 years. Top 6 protected this year. If it doesn't convert, top 6 protected next year, and so on until 2026. So it's tough to rationalize that trade given where this team is at. Jakob is a fine player, like you said, good starting center on a decent team, but for the price that you coughed up, it's looking like it's a tough trade, especially because, to your point earlier about you looking at the front court and saying these guys kind of make sense. It limited the idea of Pascal and Scottie and OG together because you had to pick 2 of them. And so it makes it a little bit harder to rationalize that trade in hindsight versus in that moment.
That's tough. That's tough. And I know that is a frustrating thing, because if that did ultimately, like, was that the reason why this thing ended? Was that the reason, like, that particular decision, did that have the snowball, the butterfly effect of kind of turning this into something that is really unsalvageable? I don't know. Like, I hope that that's not the case. I hope that wasn't kind of a part of the plan, but it does feel like something's got to shift eventually. And honestly, that's okay, because we've just talked about the backcourt being bereft of the players around Scottie that you need in order to really maximize his and OG's skill set. So maybe this is the necessary evil in order to kind of make that happen. But it does not feel good, because you draft Pascal in 2016. He's been a massive part of what you've done for a long time, and I know how difficult that can be.
Yeah, I could imagine that's difficult for the front office too, to be honest with you. And that's why, like, people ask why the Raptors hold their players so valuably, because having players that, one, want to stay in Toronto and play, and 2, have developed in your own camp and become these, all-star level players or whatever, that is of huge value to the Raptors. And I think that applies to a lot of franchises that are sort of more focused on drafting and developing versus recruiting. Sure. You really have to value the talent that you draft. And I think that just goes back to like small market stuff. And Toronto's not a small market, but in the sense that they aren't a free agency destination, you have to consider that aspect of things. It's like they love drafting and developing players. Of course, they're going to value the players that they have drafted and developed. And so like when you look at the next 6 weeks with Pascal, I'm really curious to see what inevitably ends up being the deal that does it. Because I don't know. And I know there's suitors everywhere and what they're interested in, but I'm just not sure what the package will be.
I wasn't going to bring this up, but I was doing some work before.
Okay. All right.
I've been playing around with a Donovan Mitchell trade that sends Jared Allen to a third team.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can bring back Jared Allen to Toronto. That doesn't make sense after signing Jakob Poeltl.
Right.
But can something be facilitated where Donovan Mitchell is like, hey, I could be the guy, or at least kind of the guy in Toronto, be the perfect fit next to a guy like Scottie Barnes, do all the scoring while Scottie does the majority of everything else. Could be a 1A, 1B situation and then commit to that. Like that to me, if you could make that happen, if you're the Raptors, is really intriguing.
Sign me up if that was if that's the deal. And look, the Raptors were in on Donovan Mitchell before the Cavs and the whole Knicks thing went down, so they were interested. I guess nothing happened, and I imagine that was partially because they wanted OG in on the deal or whatever. But if there's a way that you can, I mean, if that's even in the realm of possibilities, the Raptors absolutely need to do that. I guess the question not the question, but the type of player, the fit, the mold of the type of player the Raptors should be looking for are players like Donovan Mitchell or players they believe can turn into a Donovan Mitchell. The guard, this dynamic scoring guard that can work off of dribble handoffs. I honestly, I've said it a bunch. This is obviously you're a Nuggets guy. Jamal Murray would be a perfect type of guard next to Scottie Barnes. Obviously, that's never going to happen. He's sticking there, and Denver is where he's going to be home for a while. But
we're holding on to him for dear life, man.
Yeah, exactly. But in general, that type of player is what is going to work really well next to Scottie Barnes. And that should be who they prioritize if they're going out getting Pascal. I'm not saying that's Donovan Mitchell. I'm not saying that's Jamal Murray, but maybe it's Emmanuel Quickly who could turn into that. Or maybe it's AJ Griffin who they think can turn into that. I don't know. There's a bunch of different names out there, but yeah.
Man, imagine taking Emmanuel Quickly and the notes from the New York Knicks. That would be crazy.
Yeah, synergy logins and your 6th man of the year candidate. Thank you very much.
Gosh.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Anything else you want to cover? Anything else that you think that we should mention before getting out of here?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say is that this Raptors team is extremely patient. They have shown that consistently over the last 3 years. There's always been Toronto is dangling, thinking, comprehending, potentially, all the different words that, reporters use when it comes to contemplating situations in the NBA. The Raptors have been waiting patiently. And as much as we have said over the last couple of years where, hey, it's time they do it. It's time they trade this guy and it's time they do that. They have literally done the opposite almost every single time. So I'm not sure in the next 6 weeks what will happen. Me and you could both come here and say, well, we agree Pascal Siakam is the guy that needs to get moved, or they have to pick between Pascal and OG. But we don't know if they will actually do it. And that's the interesting thing, because at this point, you got to toss your notes in the air and say, all right, we'll see what happens,
I'm so curious, man. This has always been a very fascinating team, a unique team that has approached the game in an interesting way. And ever since winning the championship in 2019, it has been such an interesting, weird path to where they have gotten to this point. So I'm hoping that they get through it on the other side and that Toronto fans are happy with the result. Yeah. I know it's been tough over the course of these last couple of years. And I know the Tampa Bay year was not any better. So there's been a lot to kind of get through, but I will stress to Raptors fans, you've still got Scottie Barnes. He's really, really good.
That is pretty much the end of every sentence in my articles and podcasts for the last month and a half. Yes, the Raptors lose. They horrible loss. This happens. But also you have Scottie Barnes. See you guys next week. That's pretty much what I've been saying for the last month and a half. So, yeah.
Man. Well, here's to him getting the perfect running mate, and whether we can talk about that in 6 weeks or so. I'm looking forward to it. He is Esfandiar Baraheni of SDPN Sports. Thank you, Ez, for stopping by. We'll chat again soon, all right?
Thank you, man. Have a good one.